888 begins with a truth that sounds simple until you try to live it. Abundance is not only what comes to you, it is what can move through you without becoming distorted. Many people think abundance means accumulation, but accumulation is only one possible expression of flow. A person can have more and still feel closed, guarded, fearful, or starved inside their own life. 888 appears when the spiral begins teaching that receiving and giving are not separate movements. They are one current moving through two doors. This is why 888 often arrives after a season of completion. Once a cycle has settled, energy that was trapped in repetition begins to move again. Attention becomes available. Desire becomes clearer. Possibility feels less distant. But this new movement also reveals whether your system knows how to receive without guilt and give without depletion. 888 is the number that shows where flow is available, and where flow is still interrupted by old agreements about worth, safety, and exchange. Most people do not block abundance because they dislike receiving. They block it because receiving changes their inner responsibilities. When something good enters your life, it asks whether you can hold it without shrinking, wasting it, mistrusting it, or turning it into proof that you are finally safe. Receiving is not passive. It requires nervous system capacity, identity capacity, and relational capacity. 888 appears when life is beginning to test whether you can allow more without immediately turning that more into pressure. You may notice this in ordinary ways before you understand it spiritually. A compliment lands and you deflect it. Help arrives and you feel suspicious. An opportunity opens and your first instinct is to list why it may not work. Money comes in and your body tightens around losing it. These moments reveal that abundance is not just about access. It is about permission. And permission is often where the old pattern still lives. The mechanism of 888 is circular rather than linear. It does not move like a ladder where you climb from lack into plenty and stay there forever. It moves like circulation, where energy enters, nourishes, transforms, and returns. What you receive changes you, and what changes you changes what you are able to give. What you give creates movement in the field, and that movement reshapes what can return. 888 is the rhythm of exchange becoming conscious. This is where perspective begins to shift. If you believe abundance is possession, then every gain becomes something to defend. If you believe abundance is flow, then every gain becomes something to steward. Possession creates fear because it asks, how do I keep this from leaving? Stewardship creates maturity because it asks, how do I let this serve life without betraying myself? 888 does not shame the desire to have. It deepens the desire until having becomes part of a larger circulation. That distinction matters because some people spiritualize giving until they disappear inside it. They give to be loved, to be needed, to prove they are good, or to avoid the discomfort of receiving. This is not generosity in its cleanest form. It is often a subtle bargain, a way of controlling connection through usefulness. 888 brings attention to this because flow cannot remain harmonic when one side of the current is built on self-abandonment. At the same time, some people spiritualize receiving until they become passive. They speak of being open to abundance while avoiding the actions that make them available to it. They want return without participation, reward without relationship, harvest without cultivation. 888 does not support that distortion either. It teaches that receiving is not waiting. Receiving is alignment with the channels through which life can actually reach you. You may feel 888 as a growing awareness of your relationship with value. Not only financial value, but the value of your time, your attention, your emotional labor, your creativity, your presence. A person who does not know the value of their own energy will either overgive until resentment forms or withhold until isolation forms. Both are forms of interrupted flow. 888 appears when your sense of value is being recalibrated so that exchange can become cleaner. Experience often reveals this through repeated imbalance. You may notice where you keep giving more than you truly have. You may notice where you keep receiving but never letting gratitude become movement. You may notice where you resent others for not returning what you never clearly asked for. You may notice where you undercharge, overextend, refuse support, chase approval, or confuse sacrifice with love. 888 does not expose these patterns to make you feel small. It exposes them because abundance cannot flow through a distorted sense of self-worth. The deeper teaching is that the reciprocity begins inside you before it becomes visible outside you. If you constantly take from your body to feed your ambitions, you are already in broken exchange. If you constantly give your attention to fear and expect clarity to return, you are already misdirecting flow. If you constantly spend energy on what drains you and then wonder why life feels scarce, the current is telling the truth. 888 brings the outer conversation about abundance back into the inner economy of the self. This is why abundance can feel uncomfortable when it first starts returning. It confronts the parts of you that adapted to lack. Lack may have hurt you, but it also gives you a familiar identity. It taught you how to strive, brace, prove, and survive. When more begins arriving, that identity can become confused. You may feel exposed by ease because ease removes the old explanation for why you were not fully living. There's a quiet grief in this sometimes. You realize how long you lived in contraction. You realize how often you called scarcity realism because hope felt dangerous. You realize how many doors you never knocked on because you were already certain they would not open. 888 can appear when abundance begins returning, but also when you are finally able to see the ways you trained yourself not to expect it. That seeing is part of the return. The infinite return is not a promise that everything you give comes back in the same form. That is too narrow. Sometimes what returns is money. Sometimes what returns is support, clarity, timing, protection, rest, opportunity, confidence, or a new level of inner permission. If you expect return only in the form your mind selected, you may miss the ways life is already answered. 888 teaches you to read return through resonance rather than through demand. This changes how you understand generosity. Clean generosity does not empty the giver. It strengthens circulation. When you give from alignment, something in you remains intact. You may feel stretched, but not erased. You may feel open, but not invaded. You may feel moved, but not obligated. 888 helps you distinguish between giving that participates in flow and giving that disguises a wound. It also changes how you understand receiving. Clean receiving does not make you entitled. It makes you available. You can accept support without becoming dependent, accept success without becoming inflated, accept abundance without turning it into a monument to your insecurity. Receiving cleanly means you allow life to meet you without needing to sabotage the meeting. It means you can say yes without immediately searching for the hidden cost. As this understanding deepens, 888 becomes less about wealth and more about circulation. Wealth may be one expression, but not the whole pattern. A wealthy person can be blocked if nothing moves through them but fear. A person with modest resources can be in flow if value moves through their life with clarity, gratitude, and wise exchange. 888 does not measure abundance only by quantity. It measures whether energy can enter, nourish, and continue without becoming trapped. The implication is practical. You begin asking different questions. Not only, how do I attract more, but where does what I already have stop moving? Where have I confused holding with hoarding? Where have I confused giving with proving? Where have I confused receiving with taking? These questions do more than interpret a number. They open the channels that the number is pointing toward. And once those channels begin opening, the return becomes more intelligent. You stop chasing abundance as if it were outside the field of your daily choices. You start noticing that every exchange teaches you something about your capacity. The way you accept help, the way you price your work, the way you rest, the way you share, the way you protect your time, the way you allow joy without suspicion. All of it becomes part of the same current. 888 is therefore not simply a sign that more is coming. It is a sign that your relationship with more is being refined. More money, more visibility, more responsibility, more love, more opportunity, more peace, more creative force. Each form of more asks for a vessel that can hold it without turning it into fear or performance. The infinite return begins when you stop treating abundance as rescue and start meeting it as relationship. And when this relationship starts becoming conscious, you may begin to feel the number differently. It no longer feels like a promise sitting somewhere in the future. It feels like a current moving through the choices you are already making. It asks you to notice where life is trying to circulate through you, where you are still tightening around old scarcity, and where the next return may not be something arriving from nowhere, but something finally able to reach you because you have become open enough to let it in. When 888 begins unfolding, the first thing it teaches is that abundance cannot remain healthy if it becomes separated from rhythm. Most people think abundance is about increase, but increase without rhythm can become pressure, clutter, imbalance, or fear. A person can receive more money and immediately become more anxious. A person can receive more attention and immediately feel less free. A person can receive more opportunity and become overwhelmed because the channel opened faster than the vessel matured. This is why 888 does not only ask whether abundance is available, it asks whether abundance can circulate through your life without damaging your peace. Flow is not proven by how much enters. Flow is proven by whether what enters can nourish, move, return, and remain clean in the process. When 888 appears, life may be inviting you to see abundance as a living current rather than a pile of possessions. The question becomes less about how much you can gather and more about how wisely energy moves through you. You may notice this most clearly when something good arrives and you do not know how to relax into it. You receive support, but part of you starts calculating what you owe. You receive success, but part of you starts waiting for it to vanish. You receive recognition, but part of you becomes afraid of being seen more clearly. These reactions are not failures. They are signs that your receiving channel is opening into places where old scarcity is still trying to manage the flow. The deeper mechanism is simple. Whatever you cannot receive cleanly, you will eventually distort. If love enters a field trained by abandonment, love may be interpreted as danger. If money enters a field trained by instability, money may be treated as something that must be gripped or spent before it disappears. If praise enters a field trained by shame, praise may be rejected before it can nourish identity. 888 reveals these distortions because abundance is not only about the gift, it is about the condition of the one receiving it. This is where the teaching begins to widen. Receiving is often harder than giving for people who built their identity around usefulness. Giving lets them remain in control. Giving lets them feel needed. Giving lets them avoid the vulnerability of being met. But receiving requires a different kind of openness because it allows life, people, and the field itself to touch places in you that may not trust kindness without a hidden cost. Many people say they want abundance, but what they actually want is control that feels abundant. They want enough to never feel exposed, enough to never need anyone, enough to never be humbled by uncertainty again. That desire is understandable, but it is still built around fear. 888 gently redirects the desire. It does not say you should reject material well-being or pretend resources do not matter. It says abundance becomes cleaner when it is no longer being asked to rescue you from the work of trusting life. This changes the way you understand giving as well. Giving is not always generous just because something leaves your hands. Sometimes giving is a way to purchase belonging. Sometimes giving is a way to avoid saying no. Sometimes giving is a way to create quiet debt in another person without admitting it. 888 brings these patterns into awareness because harmonic reciprocity cannot form where giving carries a hidden demand. Clean giving has a different feeling. It may still require sacrifice, but it does not require self-erasure. It may stretch you, but it does not secretly ask you to disappear. It comes from fullness, clarity, or chosen devotion, not from panic, guilt, or the need to be seen as good. When giving is clean, the current continues moving. When giving is distorted, the current turns into resentment. You can feel the difference in the body before the mind names it. Clean giving may feel grounded, even when it is effortful. Distorted giving often creates tightness, fatigue, quiet anger, or a need to be noticed. Clean receiving may feel warm, spacious, humbling, or steady. Distorted receiving may feel suspicious, guilty, pressured, or undeserved. 888 trains you to listen to these inner signals because abundance is not only measured by what happens outside you. The number also teaches that scarcity is not always a lack of resources. Sometimes scarcity is a pattern of interruption. You interrupt support before it reaches you. You interrupt rest before it restores you. You interrupt joy by questioning whether you deserve it. You interrupt success by immediately raising the standard before the moment can land. 888 appears when these interruptions begin becoming visible because the field is trying to show you where return is already attempting to enter. This perspective changes how you read your own life. Instead of only asking why more has not arrived, you start asking where more has been unable to stay. You ask where you waste what nourishes you. You ask where you reject what would support you because it does not arrive in the form you expected. You ask where you cling to what should be moving and where you release what should be protected. These questions turn abundance from a fantasy into a practice. The practice of 888 is not passive optimism. It is intelligent participation in circulation. You become more honest about what you can give without depletion. You become more open to what you can receive without shame. You become more careful with the channels of your time, energy, money, attention, and affection. You begin to understand that your life is always exchanging something, even when no money is involved. Every yes, every no, every habit, every relationship, every focus is part of the current. There is also a deeper spiritual implication here. If abundance is circulation, then stagnation becomes one of the clearest signs that something in the exchange has lost truth. Stagnation can appear as hoarding, but it can also appear as overgiving. It can appear as refusing help, but it can also appear as taking without gratitude. It can appear as clinging to comfort, but it can also appear as chasing constant expansion without integration. 888 does not reduce abundance to positivity. It teaches you to study where life no longer moves cleanly. Once you begin studying movement, you notice that abundance is connected to timing. Receiving too early can overwhelm you. Giving too late can close a doorway. Holding too long can turn preservation into fear. Releasing too quickly can turn trust into carelessness. 888 brings sensitivity to timing because harmonic reciprocity is not only about balance and amount, it is balance in motion. This is why the infinite return is not mechanical. It is not a simple promise that whatever you give will come back immediately, equally, or in the exact form you prefer. Life is more intelligent than that. Sometimes what returns is not the object you gave, but the maturity your giving created. Sometimes what returns is not money, but the confidence to receive money without fear. Sometimes what returns is not a person, but the self-respect that keeps you from overgiving to people who cannot meet you. That return may come quietly. It may arrive as a conversation that restores clarity. It may arrive as a sudden opening after months of slow discipline. It may arrive as a boundary that protects energy you used to leak. It may arrive as rest, as courage, as a cleaner yes, as a no that finally feels peaceful. 888 helps you recognize these returns because abundance often begins by restoring the parts of you that scarcity trained to ignore. The more this number repeats, the more it asks you to mature your relationship with increase. More is not automatically better if more enters an unprepared system. More attention can amplify insecurity. More money can amplify fear. More opportunity can amplify disorganization. More love can amplify unhealed distrust. 888 appears when the field is not only offering more, but preparing you to hold more without turning it into another form of instability. This preparation is why the teaching keeps returning to value. Value is the inner measure that determines how you exchange with life. If you undervalue yourself, you will overgive and underreceive. If you overinflate yourself, you will take more than you can honor. If you do not know what your energy is worth, your life will be negotiated by fear, guilt, and urgency. 888 refines value until exchange becomes less distorted by wounds. And when value becomes clearer, abundance begins to feel less like rescue and more like relationship. You stop waiting for life to prove you are worthy. You stop giving in order to be chosen. You stop receiving as if every gift is a test. Something in you begins to understand that flow requires participation, not desperation. The current was never meant to be forced open. It was meant to be entered with enough honesty that what comes through you can continue becoming more intelligent as it moves. As 888 deepens, you begin to understand that abundance is not only a personal experience, it is also a relational intelligence. Nothing that enters your life exists in isolation once it arrives. Money changes decisions. Support changes expectations. Love changes vulnerability. Opportunity changes responsibility. Every return carries movement with it. And 888 teaches you to stop asking only what you are receiving and start asking what the receiving is now asking you to become. This is where many people lose the thread of abundance. They want the arrival, but not the reorganization. They want the blessing, but not the adjustment in identity that the blessing requires. They want life to open, but they still want to remain untouched by what comes through the opening. 888 reveals that true receiving changes the receiver. If nothing in you is changed by what arrives, then what arrived has not yet entered deeply enough to become part of your life. You may notice this with money first, because money makes the invisible visible. If scarcity is still active, money will not only represent resource, it will represent safety, control, worth, permission, power, or proof. That is why two people can receive the same amount and have completely different experiences. One relaxes into stewardship and another tightens into fear. The difference is not the number on the screen, the difference is the inner agreement attached to the flow. This is why 888 asks for maturity around material life. It does not invite you to pretend that money is unspiritual. It also does not invite you to worship it as the final sign of alignment. Money is a carrier of choice, attention, exchange, and consequence. It reveals what you value, what you fear, what you avoid, and what you believe you're allowed to hold. When 888 appears around financial matters, it often points less to instant increase and more to a needed correction in how value moves through your decisions. That correction may begin with something simple. You may become more aware of where you spend from anxiety instead of intention. You may notice where you save from fear instead of wisdom. You may begin seeing where you underprice your labor, undervalue your time, or keep saying yes to exchanges that quietly diminish you. These realizations are not separate from abundance. They are the foundation of it, because a distorted exchange pattern will eventually interrupt whatever increase it receives. The same principle applies to love. Many people want more love while still resisting the vulnerability that love requires. They want to be chosen, but they do not want to be seen. They want tenderness, but they do not want the exposure of needing. They want connection, but they do not want the responsibility of honest reciprocity. 888 appears in this field to reveal whether love can actually circulate or whether it is being stopped by fear at the doorway of the heart. Receiving love cleanly is not as easy as people imagine. It requires trust without naivety, openness without self-abandonment, and gratitude without debt. If you were trained to earn affection through performance, then being loved without immediate usefulness can feel suspicious. If you were trained to survive by being needed, then being supported can feel disoriented. 888 brings these subtle patterns into awareness because abundance and love is still abundance, and the same laws of circulation apply. Giving love cleanly also matters. Love that gives in order to secure return becomes negotiation. Love that gives without respect for its own limits becomes resentment. Love that gives only when it is praised becomes performance. Love that gives from fullness becomes a current that does not need to imprison anyone. 888 teaches that reciprocity is not keeping score, but it is also not ignoring imbalance. It is the living recognition that love must move in ways that preserve truth on both sides. This is why the infinite return is not the same as immediate reward. A reward is often imagined as something that comes back quickly enough for the ego to feel confirmed. Return is more intelligent than that. Return may take a different path, a different form, a different timing, or a different scale than the mind expected. Sometimes the return is not the thing you wanted, but the capacity that makes the thing sustainable when it finally comes. A person may give honestly and not receive from the same person. That does not mean the current failed. It may mean the return is arriving through a different channel because the original channel could not hold reciprocity. A person may serve for years and receive not applause, but refinement, authority, endurance, and a clearer voice. A person may invest love and receive not continuation, but freedom from a pattern that would have kept draining them. 888 widens your vision so you do not mistake a delayed or redirected return for absence. Experience teaches this more clearly than theory. You may look back and realize that what you thought was lost was actually a redirection of circulation. Something left your life and created room for a cleaner exchange. Something did not work out and preserved energy for something more aligned. Something you gave without understanding returned later as confidence, discernment, or opportunity. 888 often appears when you are ready to notice that life has been answering in more forms than you were trained to recognize. This recognition also changes your relationship with generosity. You stop asking whether giving guarantees return, and you begin asking whether giving is in harmony with truth. Some giving is meant to open a field. Some giving is meant to complete a cycle. Some giving is meant to release what was never meant to be held. Some giving is meant to teach you the boundary between devotion and depletion. The more conscious you become, the less you treat every act of giving as the same kind of movement. You also stop treating every act of receiving as the same kind of movement. Some receiving nourishes you. Some receiving tests your capacity. Some receiving exposes guilt you did not know you carried. Some receiving reveals that you have outgrown the identity of the one who always has to struggle. When 888 becomes active, the arrival of good things may feel less simple than expected because goodness still has to pass through the nervous system, the self-image, and the old stories about what you deserve. This is why gratitude is important, but gratitude alone is not enough. Gratitude acknowledges the gift. Stewardship learns how to live in right relationship with it. You can be grateful for a resource and still waste it. You can be grateful for a person and still take them for granted. You can be grateful for an opportunity and still fail to organize yourself around it. 888 asks for gratitude that becomes structure, because true receiving continues after the first moment of appreciation. The teaching becomes even more practical when you apply it to attention. Attention is one of the main currencies of your life, and whatever receives your attention receives your life force. If you keep giving attention to fear, fear grows more articulate. If you keep giving attention to possibility, possibility becomes easier to perceive and act upon. 888 reveals that abundance is connected not only to what you possess, but to what you feed with your awareness. This is not a call to deny hardship. It is a call to study where attention becomes unconscious payment. Many people say they want more peace, but they keep paying attention to what fragments them. They say they want more abundance, but they keep rehearsing scarcity with devotion. They say they want more love, but they keep feeding the stories that make love feel unsafe. 888 does not shame this. It simply reveals that your inner economy must align with the flow you claim to desire. Once this becomes clear, the idea of infinite return stops sounding like fantasy. It becomes a law of participation. What you feed grows in influence. What you honor becomes more available. What you circulate with integrity tends to find new pathways. What you grip from fear often loses vitality even if it remains in your possession. The return is infinite, not because every action produces a predictable reward, but because every exchange enters a larger field of consequence. This understanding softens entitlement and strengthens trust. You stop demanding that life prove itself on your timeline. You also stop abandoning your responsibility inside the current. You do what is yours to do. You receive what is able to reach you. You give what can move cleanly through you. You protect what must not be wasted. You release what becomes stagnant when held too tightly. In that way, 888 becomes a teaching on abundance as relationship rather than event. It teaches you to relate to money, love, time, attention, work, rest, and opportunity as living currents that reveal the state of your inner agreements. It shows you where giving has become performance, where receiving has become fear, where holding has become control, and where release has become wisdom. Each recognition opens another channel. Each channel changes what can return. And eventually, you begin to sense that abundance was never only about having more. It was about becoming less distorted in the presence of more. More asks for a wider vessel, a cleaner value system, a steadier nervous system, and a deeper willingness to let life move without turning every movement into threat. 888 appears when that widening has begun, when the current is already touching your life, and when the next lesson is not how to chase the return, but how to become clear enough that the return can keep moving through you without losing its light.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.